The stopwatch started at 0, and exactly 4 seconds later, the sound that echoed through the Hong Kong Grand Hotel conference room was unlike anything the 73 witnesses would ever hear again. It wasn't the sound of a table breaking or a hand slapping wood in defeat. It was the unmistakable crack of bone separating from bone, followed immediately by Muhammad Ali's scream. Bruce Lee sat frozen, his hand still locked around Ali's, his face showing the immediate realization that what had just happened was far worse than anyone had anticipated. This is the story of the 4-second arm wrestling match that shocked two sports legends, created an international incident, and raised questions about the limits of human strength that medical professionals are still debating 50 years later. Hong Kong Grand Hotel, Victoria Peak, September 8, 1972. The location was chosen specifically because both Bruce Lee and Muhammad Ali happened to be in Hong Kong simultaneously for the first time. Bruce was in the middle of filming Way of the Dragon, which was being shot at various locations around Hong Kong. Muhammad Ali had arrived for a 3-day promotional tour organized by a sports equipment manufacturer, part of his ongoing effort to maintain his public profile during his boxing prime. Neither man had planned to meet the other, but Hong Kong's media community saw an opportunity too good to miss. A local television producer named Chen Wei-ming had connections to both camps and proposed a simple idea: bring the two greatest martial artists of their respective disciplines together for a public meeting. The original plan was modest, just a photo opportunity and brief interview where both men would exchange pleasantries and perhaps demonstrate a technique or two. The hotel's conference room was booked, media were invited, and approximately 70 people gathered, including journalists, photographers, hotel staff, and members of both men's entourages. The meeting started conventionally enough. Bruce Lee, 32 years old, stood 5 feet 7 inches and weighed approximately 135 pounds of lean, precisely conditioned muscle. He wore simple black training clothes and moved with the controlled economy of motion that characterized his fighting style. Muhammad Ali, 30 years old, stood 6 feet 3 inches and weighed 210 pounds, his heavyweight boxer's frame making him appear massive next to Bruce. He wore a tailored suit and brought the charismatic energy that had made him the most recognizable athlete on the planet. The initial conversation was friendly, even playful. Ali, never one to miss an opportunity for performance, started with his trademark verbal sparring. "You're fast for a little man, but I'm the greatest. I float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. What can you do?" Bruce smiled, accustomed to Ali's style, and responded with characteristic directness. "I respect your boxing skill, but martial arts is about more than size. Technique and understanding can overcome physical advantages." The exchange was good-natured, and the media representatives were getting exactly the content they wanted. Then someone in the crowd, never definitively identified but believed to be a sports journalist, shouted a suggestion that changed everything. "Why don't you arm wrestle? Let's see strength versus technique." The room responded with immediate enthusiasm, multiple voices encouraging the idea. Arm wrestling was simple, visual, and would give the photographers dramatic images. Both Ali and Bruce initially laughed at the suggestion, treating it as the joke it was probably intended to be. But Ali, whose competitive nature was legendary and whose persona was built on never backing down from any challenge, made what would turn out to be a fateful decision. He looked at Bruce with a grin that was equal parts playful and competitive and said, "All right, little man, let's see what you got. I'll go easy on you." He walked to a table and sat down, placing his right elbow on the surface and extending his hand palm open, waiting for Bruce to accept. Bruce hesitated. Those who knew him well, including several of his students who were present, recognized the expression that crossed his face. It wasn't fear or reluctance about losing. It was concern about the situation itself. Bruce had spent years developing an understanding of human biomechanics that went far beyond normal athletic training. He understood leverage points, joint mechanics, and the precise application of force at angles that maximized mechanical advantage. He knew that arm wrestling, despite appearing simple, involved forces that could cause serious injury if applied incorrectly or with too much power against improper resistance. One of Bruce's students, a man named Wong, later stated in an interview, "I saw Bruce look at Ali's wrist position, and I could tell he was calculating something. Bruce always said that joints are the weak points, and that you never apply full forward force against a joint that's in a compromised position. I think he was seeing that Ali's wrist was already slightly bent, not in the optimal position for arm wrestling, and Bruce knew what could happen." But the room was waiting. The cameras were ready, and Ali was sitting there with his hand extended, his expression showing the absolute confidence of a man who had never lost a test of physical strength to anyone his entire life. The social pressure of the moment overcame Bruce's technical concerns. He nodded, walked to the table, and sat down across from Ali. They locked hands. The size difference was immediately apparent to everyone watching. Ali's hand completely engulfed Bruce's, his fingers wrapping around Bruce's hand with room to spare. Ali's forearm was nearly twice the diameter of Bruce's. All heavyweight boxer muscle developed through thousands of hours of heavy bag work. The conventional wisdom in the room was unanimous. Ali would win easily, perhaps in a few seconds, and the only question was whether Bruce could last long enough to make it interesting. Chen Wei-ming, the television producer, had brought a stopwatch, thinking it would add drama to time how long Bruce could resist. He positioned himself where he could see both fighters clearly, held up the stopwatch where cameras could capture it, and called out the countdown. 3, 2, 1, go! The first second involved both fighters establishing their grip and position. Ali, true to his word about going easy, didn't apply his full strength immediately. He was smiling, playing to the cameras, clearly expecting this to be a fun moment rather than a serious competition. Bruce's expression was different, focused, intense. His eyes not on Ali's face, but on their joined hands, specifically on the angle of Ali's wrist. The second changed Ali's expression. He felt Bruce's grip suddenly increase in pressure, not in the palm-to-palm pushing that normally characterizes arm wrestling, but in a specific twisting motion that Bruce applied with his fingers against the back of Ali's hand. Several witnesses later described seeing Bruce's entire body engage, his core muscles visibly tightening, his free hand gripping the table edge, his feet planted and pushing against the floor. This wasn't casual party arm wrestling. This was Bruce applying biomechanical principles with full commitment. Ali's smile disappeared. He felt his wrist being forced into a position that didn't feel right, a rotation that was pushing his hand backward rather than just down. He tried to counter, applying more of his own strength, using the substantial weight advantage and arm mass that had never failed him. But the angle was wrong. Bruce had established a mechanical advantage in the first second, and Ali's additional force, rather than helping him, was actually working against his own joint structure. The third second brought the critical moment. Bruce applied what those familiar with Wing Chun would recognize as a lapso motion combined with a downward spiral. His hand wasn't just pushing Ali's down, it was rotating Ali's wrist while pulling and pushing in multiple vectors simultaneously. Ali felt something wrong in his wrist and tried to release, to open his hand and stop the match. But Bruce's grip was locked, his fingers positioned in a way that prevented Ali from opening his hand. This wasn't malicious. Bruce was simply applying the grip technique he had trained for years, which was designed to maintain control specifically to prevent opponents from escaping. The fourth second ended with the sound. Ali's wrist, already rotated beyond its safe range of motion and supporting force from both his own resistance and Bruce's application, reached the structural limit of the bones and ligaments involved. The scaphoid bone, one of the small carpal bones in the wrist, fractured first. A fraction of a second later, the radius bone, one of the two main forearm bones, developed a hairline fracture at the point where it connected to the wrist joint. The combination of rotational force and compression exceeded what the bone structure could handle. Ali screamed. It was a sound of immediate, intense pain, completely unlike anything he had vocalized in any of his boxing matches where he had taken punches that would have knocked out ordinary men. Bruce's eyes widened in shock, and he immediately released his grip, but the damage was done. Ali pulled his hand back, cradling it against his chest, his face contorted in pain. His wrist had already begun swelling, visible to everyone in the room within seconds. The conference room erupted in chaos. Several people rushed forward, including Ali's trainer, Angelo Dundee, who immediately recognized the seriousness of the injury. Bruce stood up, his face showing genuine horror at what had happened. He tried to approach Ali to apologize, but Dundee held up a hand, not aggressively but firmly, indicating Bruce should stay back while they assessed the situation. Bruce stood there, looking at his own hand as if it belonged to someone else, clearly shocked at what his own strength had done. The hotel staff called for medical assistance, and within 15 minutes, paramedics arrived with proper support equipment. Ali was transported to Hong Kong Central Hospital, where X-rays confirmed what everyone already suspected. His right wrist had sustained a serious fracture requiring immediate medical intervention. The doctors determined that the scaphoid bone was fractured, and the radius had a hairline crack. The injury would require 8 weeks in a cast, followed by extensive physical therapy, and there was serious concern about whether Ali's wrist would ever return to full boxing strength. The media coverage was immediate and international. By the next morning, newspapers around the world carried the story, though with wildly different angles. American sports media focused on Ali's injury and what it might mean for his boxing career. Hong Kong media emphasized that the incident happened in their city and included extensive speculation about what had actually occurred. Martial arts publications tried to analyze the technical aspects of how such an injury could happen so quickly. Boxing magazines questioned whether arm wrestling was fundamentally different from the strength tests boxers regularly performed. Bruce Lee released a public statement within 24 hours through his production company. The statement expressed profound regret for the injury, emphasized that he had tried to warn against the arm wrestling match but had agreed under social pressure, and offered to cover all of Ali's medical expenses. The statement concluded, "I have spent my life studying human movement and the application of force. I knew the risks involved in applying certain techniques, which is why I was hesitant to participate. This incident demonstrates why martial arts training emphasizes control and why competitions need proper rules and safety measures. I deeply regret that my concern about social perception overcame my technical judgment." Muhammad Ali's response came 2 days later, after the initial pain had subsided enough for him to think clearly. He held a brief press conference from his hospital bed, his right arm in a cast from fingertips to elbow. His statement surprised many people. "Bruce didn't do nothing wrong. I challenged him. The room pushed for it, and I went into it thinking my size would be enough. He tried to warn us it could be dangerous, and I didn't listen. This ain't on him. This is on me for not respecting that he knows things about human body mechanics that I don't. He's not a boxer. He's something different. And I learned that the hard way. The incident raised serious questions in both the boxing and martial arts communities. Sports medicine professionals analyzed what had happened, trying to understand the biomechanics that could cause such a severe injury so quickly. Dr. Robert Chen, an orthopedic surgeon at Hong Kong Central Hospital who treated Ali, later published a paper about the incident with Ali's permission. The paper noted that the combination of rotational force, compression, and the specific angle of application had created what engineers would call a mechanical failure point in the wrist structure. The paper concluded that while the injury appeared dramatic, it was actually predictable given the forces involved and the joint's biomechanical limitations. Bruce Lee was deeply affected by the incident. Those close to him reported that he became even more cautious about public demonstrations, particularly those involving any kind of competitive element. He used the incident as a teaching moment for his students, emphasizing that understanding human biomechanics carried serious responsibility. In private, he expressed frustration that social pressure and public expectations had pushed him into a situation where his technical knowledge told him injury was likely, but social dynamics made it difficult to refuse. Muhammad Ali recovered fully, though the process took longer than initially estimated. The 8 weeks in a cast extended to 10 weeks when the initial X-rays showed slower healing than expected. The physical therapy required an additional 3 months of dedicated work. Ali returned to boxing 6 months after the incident, and while some boxing analysts claimed they could detect a slight weakness in his right-hand power, Ali went on to have several more successful years in boxing, including his famous victories in the 1970s. The two men met again approximately 1 year later in Los Angeles at a private dinner arranged by a mutual friend. By all accounts, the meeting was friendly and involved no lingering animosity. They discussed the incident openly, with Ali joking that he had learned never to arm wrestle a martial artist, and Bruce responding that he had learned the importance of trusting his technical judgment regardless of social pressure. They remained respectful of each other for the rest of Bruce's life. September 8, 1972. Hong Kong Grand Hotel. 4 seconds that demonstrated the difference between strength and biomechanical application. 73 witnesses to a moment that changed how both boxing and martial arts communities thought about the intersection of different fighting disciplines. Muhammad Ali's wrist healed, but the incident remained a permanent reminder that size and power, while formidable, are not absolute advantages against someone who understands leverage, angles, and the mechanical limits of human joints.